Welcome to Planet Possible News, where each month I'm joined by an environmental expert to explore issues that are making the headlines, keeping you right up to date with what's happening globally across water, nature and climate. And today we're joined by the co-founder of Zevero, self-confessed climate optimist and author of the weekly Grumpy Optimists newsletter, George Wade. And we'll be talking about the impact of the Iranian war on global energy security and supply chains, the creation of a new wetland in the east of England, and tegelwippen, I hope I've got that right, the Dutch concept of tile flipping. But before we do that, a very warm welcome to Planet Possible News, George. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Niki. Yeah, great to be here.
Well, as a regular subscriber to the Grumpy Optimists newsletter, and we'll pop a link to that in the show notes, I am really looking forward to hearing your take on some of the stories that you've picked. So let's get straight into it. So the first story you've selected is about the Iranian war, and I picked up on this briefly in our April episode with John Curtin, and the impact on energy security and supply chains is continuing to develop. So tell us more about what you've read.
One of the key things with any topic, it's very easy to see a lot of negatives in it, which is the whole concept of the grumpy optimist is trying to take that positive outlook on what sometimes can feel a bit too much. But what I really liked about the story was that it's talking about how we're seeing this shift in investment going into renewables and into clean energy off the back of obviously all of the challenges and the troubles in the Iran war. And I think for me, one of the kind of really interesting things is there's a lot of money, so there's 2.3 trillion going into clean energy off the back of it. For me, it's actually that's going into it from a national security perspective. It's going into it as a sovereignty perspective rather than it being purely climate. And for me, I think that's really an important shift of probably want to say we want to do everything for the right reasons. But actually, that's not always possible for most people, and especially for government. So I think that's kind of a really good story to see how things can change.
I think you're right. And the right reasons actually are different for different people, aren't they? So actually, if it's around economic growth, and that's led by energy security, then you can kind of see it's just the same argument framed differently. And I think one of the challenges that we certainly have here in the UK around the polarisation of our politics is that climate change can then suddenly become the football that bounces backwards and forwards. And actually, the outcomes that are good for the climate are also good for people's homes and security and jobs. And it's not a sort of zero-sum game, is it? It's not either or. You can do both, I think. But it's also up to the likes of you and I think, sometimes to find the right language to be able to articulate that so it doesn't just sound like it's just about hugging the odd tree, really, which it sometimes can, I think.
It's a really great point. It's interesting because it was actually the first piece myself and at the time my co-author of the blog, now I run it myself, but that was the first piece we wrote. It was called Reframing the Climate Narrative. And our whole thing was that effectively we need to get rid of the climate as being the narrative, and it should be health, it should be security, it should be for just a better life. I think this is a really good example of how if we do start to think about that shift and the narrative that can change, we can see an impact that maybe doesn't align with the climate side as much as we'd like, but it's just as valuable effectively.
And I know that you also spotted something else in the news that I thought was fascinating. And the headline was around Japanese food manufacturers changing from colour to black and white packaging. Tell us a little bit more about how that fits in, really, because it's fascinating to see the ripple effect, isn't it, of something like a conflict that's happening in the Middle East spreading to, well, globally.
There's a company called Bwlb, and they produce consumer goods. They're like almost a Unilever of the UK in Japan. And they've had to change 14 of their products from coloured packaging, so I think the example was crisps, to actually using black and white. And the reason for that is that Japan imports a lot of their oil. And what it actually was a specific type of oil, naphtha oil, where they were importing that from the Middle East, the Strait of Hormuz. And now they're unable to print in colour. Those sorts of decisions, what I find really interesting is that in Japan, any changes, whether it's price changes, whether it's something that's like the product has changed, they almost come with a company level apology. It's crazy. The UK will be apologising every other week at this point. Companies basically want to keep the price the same, and that's kind of the mentality. So this might seem like a kind of small change for a lot of companies. And in the UK, maybe there's a little bit around the resilience, and that's actually understood by consumers. But in Japan, that's actually a really, really big deal. So I thought it was, as someone that works in the industry and works in the country, I thought it was very, very interesting to highlight these impacts that actually are happening outside of just petrol prices going up. But black and white crisps, it feels like we're going back to the 40s or 50s.
What you start to realise is that everything is, well, listeners will get bored of me saying this, I say it all the time, but everything is connected, isn't it? And supply chains are global. And when you start to see the impact on, if it's products in Japan, I know I've certainly read across a huge amount of Asia actually, everything from petrol itself, obviously, and fuels, but also people are seeing an impact in their wages now. People are seeing an impact in some countries are not able to work every day of the week. There are gargantuan impacts happening. We're, in some respects, feel a little bit insulated, I think, in the UK to some of this. We're watching it happen, but I think when you look globally, we're certainly seeing the impact of a lack of fuel getting out of that region on everyday lives, whether that's your crisps look a bit different in the shop, or actually you can't get to work anymore on a Wednesday because you're not allowed to travel those days. It creates the case for energy security. The challenge is then, well, what does that security look like, and what's the right transition, and how do you do that in a fair and just way, I think.
Maybe just on that final point around taking that optimistic mindset of this is obviously a horrendous thing that's happening. But one of the things that I found quite interesting when I was kind of going, okay, what's the actual knock-on impact? In the UK, we've had a 51% increase in March in heat pumps. Octopus Energy put that out. Solar and heating sales have gone up 10x from last year. So we actually are starting to see this kind of trickle down into not just corporate level or organization level making different changes, but actually households are going, well, hold on a minute, we do need to think about this. And it's not just in one place, as you mentioned. Korea, solar panel imports went up 137% in the last year.
Those are not small decisions at householder level. If you decide that you're going to switch from a gas boiler to a heat pump, or move to having solar panels in some respects are a bolt on, aren't they? But a heat pump, that is a big commitment, right? If you're taking gas out and moving to that. So it's really interesting that we're seeing such a rapid acceleration. I will be interested to see if that continues or what that trend looks like, whether this is a blip, a related blip or not. It will be interesting to see if it just generally accelerates the transition.
Yeah, it could be a little bit of causation versus correlation there, but I would like to think that it's only helps lift that graph in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm sticking on the positive front, totally. Right, so for the next story, you've picked out some lovely positive news about a 62-acre wetland in the east of the UK. So tell us a little bit more about what you found out, George.
Really interesting. There's a wetland, and effectively it's this whole idea that we've controlled nature for too long, and what we actually should be doing is trying to give back space, give back natural processes to nature, and effectively creating this wetland where we're now starting to see, it's not just, okay, great, there's a puddle somewhere. It's actually what comes with it. It's the birds that are coming back. It's all of the different species. And for me, I always love those stories of hope in recognizing that if we make the right changes, it's not a 1 + 1 = 2 situation. It's actually you start something and you go 1 + 9 because of everything else that nature can do off the back of the work that we could if we put our resources in the right place effectively.
I think this is a lovely story because it links to climate in a way that perhaps isn't that obvious to begin with. And I don't know how much you read about why the wetland's being built. With my geeky water hat on, I can probably give you a bit more, which is, so we drain the fens. They've been drained historically to be really a huge agricultural powerhouse of England, really. So when I was looking at some of the stats, a fifth of the nation's crops, a third of our vegetables come from the fenlands, right? So that's why they have been drained. So your point about kind of controlling nature, like half of the most fertile agricultural land that we have in the UK comes from there. However, because we've drained them, they are really low lying. They are really susceptible to both drought and flooding. And so with my kind of day job hat on, that's something that I'm very much aware of and alive to. And so actually putting wetlands back in might seem a bit counterintuitive, but alongside all of the benefits that you've just talked about for nature, which are totally fantastic, wetlands are also now acting as a bit of a buffer to some of those shocks. So they provide water when it's needed as a resource to recharge aquifers or to recharge rivers. And also they're a buffer to flooding as well. So, and they've got brilliant water quality benefits. So it's really interesting to see them going in. It feels like a wonderful, positive nature story, but actually this is kind of natural engineering at its finest, really, and it's climate resilience baked in. That's what it's doing. And there's a huge project happening across the whole of the fens, kind of future fens, to make that area resilient to climate, because if we don't, the risk will be with sea level rise, that will be an area that will just be sort of really significantly impacted by both flooding and drought. So it's a really interesting, not very often talked about part of England, but absolutely critical to, again, back to that resilience piece around how do we keep the UK resilient from a food production perspective. We've got to be able to protect that part of the country. I geeked out a bit there, George. I'm really sorry, but I'm glad you picked the story.
Please carry on. That's what it's about. One of the things that I really enjoy sometimes about things like that is that they're incredibly visual. Like in your mind, you can picture, if you sat wherever you are now and your eyes are maybe not quite closed because you might be in an office, but you can imagine what this great body of water and the rewilding and all the birds that come back and the benefits that come with it. And I think in the world that we operate in, especially for myself, which is a lot of data and a lot of supply chain stuff, it's all very out there and it's not concrete. Whereas you do see these options and these opportunities and these really good stories. And I think it's quite powerful to remember that, we've got the big picture around the finance going into energy and all these things with Iran, but then there's all these kind of small, medium-sized projects which are also just as powerful and just as fascinating at creating change as well.
And something I've observed from my career in the water sector is that nothing beats a site visit. And actually, if ever you want to change hearts and minds, taking people to those locations and showing them the impact, showing them what's possible is better than any PowerPoint deck or beautifully created graph. I think, it's good for the soul, I think, isn't it? And people can really connect with stuff and think, I get it. Yeah, well, a lovely example, and we'll pop a link to the new wetland in the show notes. Right, final story. And George, I am so pleased that you chose this because it's something that I've seen previously and I think it's wonderful. Apologies for any Dutch speakers in our listenership. Tegelrippen, I think it's called. So it's a fantastic initiative in the Netherlands. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so this is started by an organisation and effectively it's a competition for ripping up patio tiles. So there's this whole depaving movement, which I actually love. I think if I, in a different world and a different job, I would work on bringing as many trees to urban areas as possible. I don't know what it is. It makes me so happy living in London and I see someone planting a tree or a new green area going in, and I think that is what I'd love to do. But the good news is there's 14 million tiles that have disappeared in the last 5 years. And one of the best things about this is that I think we've talked about that big picture with the kind of Middle East and the war. We've got these kind of great big projects which have happened over the last 20, 25 years. And now we've got this thing which is almost guerrilla gardening. I could go home if I lived in a flat that had paving tiles outside that I could rip up without getting kicked out. And I could do this to my own place. And I could start to think, how do I go from having, 10 tiles to having 8 tiles and what goes in there as well. So for me, I think that's fascinating. There's 199 municipalities that are competing around the Netherlands, and we've started to see that creep in around the world as well, right? It's not just a Dutch phenomenon. I'm sure there are other words that translate so poorly we can't say them too, Niki. But I think it's a really fascinating way to create that resilience within ourselves and within the urban environment as well.
I loved this. I think there is something a bit fun, isn't there, about the idea of just even the word, like whipping up some tiles and popping in a little bit of planting instead. I love it. And actually, if you go online and look at some of the pictures of the gardens, I was following somebody on Instagram who was part of it, who sort of said, I started with a little, literally, and these are small tiles. We're not talking about slabs, are we, that we get in the UK? These are sort of small tiles, but then started to plant. And then over a period of not that many years, their garden is now this green oasis, and then they're seeing their neighbours cottoning onto it.
Exactly. I think for me, that's one of the most exciting parts about it is that people follow what other people do. And it's this whole like no mow May that's happened in May in the UK. You see your neighbours not cutting their grass at the front, and that you see the flowers that come up or whatever it might be. And you think, oh, if I just got past that not so nice stage of long grass that looks unkept, I can get to that point. And I think this is a really great way to say, actually, I care about this in terms of the planetary crisis, and I'm going to act in a way that makes me feel empowered. And you can get kids involved. I've seen loads of this. I don't know if you've seen this, Niki, but there's a lot of school playgrounds where they're doing the exact same, because you've essentially got tarmac and asphalt, and you've basically got a heat trap with next Wednesday when we're recording it's like meant to be 30 degrees in London. So the reason why this is all good is not just because it makes us feel good and it's green, but actually it stops overheating and it helps cool urban areas as well, which, yeah, I find this a fascinating story.
George, that's all we've got time for, but thank you so much for bringing such lovely and interesting stories. Really appreciate it. And if listeners want to subscribe to the Grumpy Optimist newsletter, then we'll pop a link to that in the show notes. I'd highly recommend it. Thank you for joining us on this episode as well. If you don't already, subscribe to Planet Possible wherever you get your podcasts to never miss an episode. And if you want to follow up on any of the topics we've discussed today, or join our mailing list and be the first to hear about new episodes and guests, click the links in the show notes too. Our next episode is out next Thursday, and I'm joined by Karma Loveday and Alan Lovell to talk about water in transition in both Australia and the UK. That's it, everyone. Stay curious, stay connected, and we'll see you next time.